In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Hello everybody, hope you are doing great. You are watching FOADEBATE. Today I'm honored to host Mark Glenn, the well-known American political analyst. Mark, thank you so much for being here. Today we want to delve into one of the most fundamental issues in the current affairs, the legitimacy crisis of the Zionist project. Many believe that following the events of October 7th and especially the war in Gaza, the regime is facing its most profound challenges, not just military, but morally, politically, and ideologically since its very founding. What is your analysis of the roots of this crisis?
Yes, well, first of all, you're correct. There is this change of season that has taken place as a result of the deliberate genocide, the deliberate mass murder of people in Gaza. A large part of the world, especially the West, was under this magic spell for a long time with regards to Israel and the rights of the Jews to steal all of the land, not just in Palestine, but throughout the entire Middle East. There was this magic spell that prevented the average person in the West from recognizing the horrible reality of what all of this was about. Now, as a result of October the 7th, and I would also add to that, as a result of the efforts of those who make up the resistance, individuals such as you, such as myself, such as the millions of people around the world who for years and decades have been trying to wake the world up and make the world understand that we're dealing with this supernatural monster here in the form of the Jewish state. I think that our efforts have been rewarded by the powers of heaven. The powers of heaven have recognized that, okay, we have this group of people here who dedicate themselves to trying to tell the truth about this, and that added to the utter brutality of what has taken place for the last 2 years has broken that spell.
Right.
So there's a new season now, okay? The people of the world, and especially the people in the West, let's just be honest about it. The people in the West, where all of the money, all of the political power, all of the military power, where all of that resides, they have to be woken up. If the people of the West do not wake up to the nature of this evil thing, then it'll just go on forever. So whereas the people in the Islamic countries, they already understand this, the people of the West don't. So it's a new season, and there's no going back. Okay, no matter what kind of black magic that the Jews try to employ to make the West go back to sleep, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I think that this is a miracle, to be honest. If you're asking me as a political scientist whether or not I think that this is purely a natural event, I think that there's a miracle involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no question about the fact that it's a new season. Okay, this large creature has woken up, and it's not going back to sleep, no matter what kind of evil that the state of Israel does. If it uses, at this point, anything that Israel does, it will just wake people up even more. So that's where we stand right now. And as much as individuals such as you and I and your listening audience celebrate that fact, at the same time, we have to be very honest in understanding that now the Jews are cornered, and we have, as it is with any dangerous animal, when it is cornered, it is likely to lash out. And I fear that this is what the Jews are going to do, is that they're going to lash out in ways that we cannot even imagine, that will make what has happened in Gaza look like a fist fight after school. Okay. You're talking about a state, a terrorist state, that has nuclear weapons, that has biological weapons, that has weather modification weapons. Okay, such as where a country as large as Iran wouldn't see rain for months and months and months, and all sorts of other things. Both in the Christian and the Islamic understanding of the end times, we both understand, both of our peoples understand, that this ruler, this force, whatever we want to call it, that arises during this time period will have supernatural, unnatural powers over the natural world.
Right.
And I think that the Jews have this power. They have this ability to alter the normal course of events for nature in order to do damage to God's world and to God's order.
Right. On what basis did the Zionist project initially seek to build its legitimacy? And were these foundations inherently flawed from the very beginning?
Well, contrary to what a lot of people believe, the Zionist problem did not begin 100 years ago with Theodor Herzl and his book, the Jewish State. The Zionist project is thousands of years old. Anybody that can read should just get a copy of the most read book in human history, which is the Bible, and go back and read from the beginning in the book of Genesis and all of these other books where the Hebrews at that time were told that the entirety of the Middle East, from the Nile River in Egypt all the way to the Euphrates in Iraq, belongs to this one tiny group of people. So this is the basis upon which the whole Zionist project gets its foundation. Even though the word Zionism doesn't appear until 2,000, 3,000 years later, nevertheless, this is the basis upon which the Jews foundation their plan to take over first the Middle East and then the rest of the world. The reason for taking over the Middle East is that this is, as they believe it, this will be their base of operations. And from there, they will take over the rest of the planet. So the foundation of Zionism goes back much, much further than simply Theodor Herzl or 1948. And this is really what people have to understand about the nature of this problem. The Jews have had 3,000 years to plan all of this out. They didn't just begin planning this out a century ago, or in the last years of World War II. They've been planning this out for a long, long time. So now, of course, the basis upon which they did all of this, as I said, with the Western world that is, for all intents and purposes, considered Christian in its religious orientation, the Jews appealed to that religious element in the Christian world by saying, look, your own Bible, your Christian Bible, says that this land belongs to us. Of course, what they forget, what they don't mention to these same Christian countries, is that Jesus was very clear when he said that this land would be taken away from the Jews and that it would be given to a people who was more worthy, okay, meaning the Arabs, the Palestinians, the true people of the Middle East.
Right.
So there's the religious foundation for this. And then, of course, there is the argument that people such as Theodor Herzl used in justifying this by saying that the Jews will never be welcome anywhere that they go, that they'll always be persecuted, they'll always be seen as a subversive element within Gentile societies, and therefore the Jews had to have their own place. So both of these, the religious foundation of it, of course, is flawed, because these are all arguments that the Jews themselves created, wrote for themselves. Okay, as the Islamic tradition clearly states, the Jews changed the Torah into something different from what it was originally,
Exactly.
and they rebuilt this thing in such a way that it served their purposes. Okay. Um, Now the other argument about the Jews not being welcome any Gentile place where they go, this is flawed in itself as well, because if the Jews throughout history have had a difficult time, getting along, excuse me, getting along in Gentile societies, then simply follow the laws. Okay, don't act as an obnoxious, violent, aggressive, and criminal element within those societies, and you'll get along. And the proof of this is how the Jews were treated in those Islamic countries where they lived. Okay, the Islamic countries, the Jews did just fine. Okay,
Yeah.
and it was because of the fact that those Islamic countries had very strict rules that were not to be violated, and if you violated them, you were going to pay the price.
Right.
Now, the problem with the Christian countries, because of our understanding of the Old Testament, the Torah, and all of the rest of that, um, the Western countries had a different way of dealing with them. They allowed the Jews to engage in money lending at usury. So the Islamic countries, very wisely, okay, um, they prevented the Jews from engaging in those practices, which are wrong, which are anti-God, such as usury. And therefore, the Jews got along pretty well. They considered, it their golden age when they lived under Islamic rule. So, the long answer to your short question about the foundations of Zionism and how illegitimate these foundations are, it's all based upon an illusion. Okay, it's all based upon a logic that is not rooted in logic, that is not rooted in truth. Okay,
Right.
uh, there was no promise to them that they were going to take over the Middle East and then take over the world, at least not by God. Okay, and therefore, all of their arguments in this regard, they're a fantasy. It's a dream. It's like a schizophrenic, somebody with a mental disorder who sees monsters everywhere and there are
I
none.
see. Yeah.
Okay, and I think this is probably the best way for us to understand the delusion that powers their activities, is that you're dealing with somebody a group of people who suffer from a form of diabolical mental illness.
Great perspective. Yeah. I would like to concentrate on the Israeli domestic front in this part of our discussion. We witnessed the largest protest in Israeli history against Netanyahu over the so-called judicial overhaul. Does this deep schism within Israeli society indicate a crisis of the government's legitimacy in the eyes of its own citizens?
There's no such thing as Jewish democracy. There's no such thing as a Jewish democratic state. Okay? The very idea of democracy, according to the strict interpretation of Jewish religious law, is blasphemy. It's heretical. The idea that the people have any say in their government it's an illusion in terms of the plans for the creation of this Jewish state. Now, so what is according to Jewish religious law, what is the proper way for the Jews to have a state? Only through a king. That's it. And no voting, and especially no equal rights for non-Jews. Okay. So the question then is, well, then why do the Jews always refer to Israel as this Jewish democratic state? Well, they had to. They had to do this in order to sell the idea to the West that they were just like England and France and Italy and Spain and Germany and the United States, Western democratic states. Okay, they had to sell that idea to them in order to get money, in order to get weapons, in order to get political support. The Jews had to paint themselves as being just an extension of Western democratic tradition, political tradition. Okay. But this is not what they planned from the beginning. The plan was, we will pretend to be this for a while, okay, until we've gotten all of the money, all of the weaponry, all of the political support that we need. And then we're going to change this over from a democratic secular state into a monarchical religious state. Okay?
Right.
Excuse me. So, the judicial reform was based upon this model. Netanyahu finally had the kind of government that he needed. All of these religious crazies over there who do not believe in democracy. Remember, the idea of democracy comes from the Greeks, okay? The Jews despise the Greeks. They despise the Greeks because the Greeks militarily and politically ruled over the Jewish state for a long time.
Right.
Every year, their religious celebration of Hanukkah is their celebration of having risen up against the Greeks and driven them out of the Jewish state. So the idea that the Jews would develop a Greek, a Western method of ruling their country in the form of democracy is simply impossible. So the judicial reform is part of this process of transferring the Jewish state from this modern, liberal, democratic, Western style state back into the kind of state that Jewish religious law commands that it be. Okay.
Right.
Where only Jews possess any kind of rights, human rights, political rights, and for the most part, non-Jews are not permitted to live within the state except as servants and as slaves. So what happened is that Netanyahu and these other religious crazies that occupy his government, they tried to begin this process of transforming this democratic state. And we both know it's not a democratic state. Okay, this is just the, this is, we have a saying in the West, it's the equivalent of putting lipstick on a pig. Okay, that's the statement that we have. Okay, so you take a pig and you put lipstick on it and some eye makeup and a wig, but it's still a pig. Okay,
right.
So what happened is that Netanyahu and the rest of these religious crazies, hardcore jihadists. Now notice the change of terminology. Okay, we hear all the time about the word jihad, which is used in a very insulting way towards Muslims. We know it has nothing to do with violence. Okay, it has to do with conquering the soul and making yourself a more holy person. The jihadists, however, just one change, one little letter change. The jihadists believe in violence, religious violence. Okay, anybody that challenges the supremacy of Jewish religious law, chop their heads off. Where did ISIS get all of its ideas for doing what it did? Okay, it was a creation of Israeli intelligence, and given the fact that the Jews believe in jihad, okay, they really do. Of course, this is where ISIS got the idea for chopping people's heads off who were considered infidels. Anyway, so the problem is that in building this Jewish state, they have had to pull in Jews from all over the world. And many of these Jews are not religious, okay? They've lived in Western countries. They've lived in moderate, liberal societies, okay? And so the idea that you don't that there's this whole list of things that you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath, okay? is just something that they're not interested in adopting for themselves. Okay.
Right.
According to Jewish religious law, all of the women after they're married, they have to shave their heads, and they have to cut their nails, and they have to dress like a cave woman, okay, so that they no longer have any beauty in them. This is just one of the many. So the Jewish population in Israel, when Netanyahu, I know this is a very long answer to your short question, but you have to understand that the people themselves, especially those Jews that came from these Western liberal countries, they said, no, this is crazy. We're not allowed to turn on the radio or the television on the Sabbath. We're not allowed to cook our food on the Sabbath. We're not allowed to carry any objects outside of our home on the Sabbath. All of these rules, these ridiculous rules that a practicing Jew is required to follow. And so this is the reason that they've run into trouble, why Netanyahu and his government has run into trouble with this. And so obviously, October 7th couldn't have come along at a better time. Netanyahu and his government made up of these religious crazies. And understand, when I say religious crazies, I don't think that people who are religious are crazy, okay? I'm religious, you're religious, we're not crazy. But those people, okay, the Netanyahus and the Smotriches and the Ben-Gavirs and all of the rest of them, these are religious crazies because of their jihadism.
Right.
So October 7th could not have come along at a better time, okay? Almost as if Netanyahu and the rest of them planned it that way, which they did. There's the notion that Israel didn't know that October 7th was coming is just simply not possible. For us to believe that would require us to forget everything that we have learned about how these people operate.
Yeah.
And their ability. If they can pull off what they did in Beirut with the pagers, okay,
Right.
then they knew that October 7th was coming. So as much as we want to think that October 7th was done to end the protests in Israel, certainly that was part of it, but that was not all of it. There's a much bigger agenda involved in all of this, but October 7th certainly put it off for the time being. But rest assured that it is going to come back. The issue of the judicial reform will return.
Exactly. It acts actually as a catalyst to bring this long simmering legitimacy crisis to the surface,
Exactly.
making it visible for all. Thank you so much. I would like to discuss the international stage. What is happening on the international stage? Actually, the International Court of Justice is hearing a case accusing Israel of genocide, and the International Criminal Court has sought arrest warrants for its leaders, and specifically Netanyahu. How are these processes impacting the regime's global legitimacy?
Well, I'm going to quote Ariel Sharon, the former Israeli prime minister and a war criminal. He was quoted in an interview once saying, "I don't believe in this thing known as international law." He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not quoting it verbatim. He said, "I don't believe in this thing known as international principles or international law. We have our own laws that we follow. And our laws tell us that we're supposed to kill all of the Palestinians, drive them out of their land, and create this Jewish state because, again, we have to crawl into the mind of the alligator here and understand how the alligator thinks."
Right.
And according to the Jewish understanding of things, God does not exist in the world if there is no Jewish state. The world is just this place that exists, but it is separate from God. Is not there. The Jews believe, according to their religious teachings, that God has been gone from the world for the last 2,000 years since the Romans came and destroyed their temple.
Yeah.
Okay. This is why it's so important to the Jews that this temple be rebuilt. Because as soon as the temple is rebuilt, and then the Jews can begin their religious practice again of slaughtering animals, okay, God is not here. So, as far as the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and these other international entities, with their non-Jewish laws applying pressure on Israel to cease and desist with the genocide in Gaza, or wherever they decide the next genocide will be, the West Bank, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, wherever. To them, it means nothing. Yes, they are, the Jews are inconvenienced over the fact that there are these arrest warrants, and that it's very possible that they could find themselves being arrested. But as far as them changing their behavior in order to deal with the situation so that they're no longer running into trouble with these international organizations, no, it will not happen. And what we have to keep in mind is that, you know, these international organizations like the ICC and the ICJ, they don't have their own police force. They have to depend upon the countries that have signed onto this charter to enforce these arrest warrants. Now, the countries of the West, and really, if we want to be honest about it, probably all the countries in the world, are absolutely terrified of Israel. They know that Israel has nuclear weapons, Israel has biological weapons, Israel has control over the world's economy, Israel has control over, you know, with one push of one button on a computer, Israel could shut down the internet throughout the entire world. So that means there's no information, there's no commerce, governments cannot function, there's no running water, okay, there's no heat, nothing. Everything about our modern existence stops like that. So these countries that are signatories to these charters, there's no doubt that Israel has, for the last 40, 50 years or longer, has smuggled nuclear weapons into every capital throughout the world. Washington, D.C., Tehran, Paris, Berlin, Rome, has smuggled nuclear weapons into every country's capital, and has made this fact known to the governments of these countries. So we have to be realistic in our hopes that these countries will actually go forward with their agreements and honor these arrest warrants. But at the same time, we're dealing here, you know, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister during the Six-Day War, he's quoted saying one time that Israel should be like a rabid dog, meaning a dog that has rabies. It's too dangerous to get near or to touch or to, you know, you just don't want to deal with it. And that's what Israel has become. Nobody wants to deal with it. The most powerful countries in the world are terrified of dealing with them because they know that these people are nuts.
So, all in all, what are the likely scenarios for the Zionist project? How can you predict?
Okay, well, as I said at the beginning of our interview, it is a new season. Okay, there's no question about the fact that the magic spell that the Jews had cast over the minds of the people of the West, especially, is beginning to wear off. I mean, they don't care anymore about the Holocaust. They don't care anymore about anti-Semitism. You know, they just don't care. So the pig with the lipstick and the eye makeup and the perfume and the wig, you know, it's all beginning to break down. And now people are looking at the pig and saying, why should we treat this pig as if it was this beautiful thing when it isn't? So because of that, now you have um, political leaders, especially in the West, that have large numbers of their people putting political pressure on governments to do something about Israel. So you have this tug of war now that did not exist before. Before, these governments, not just in the West, but certain governments in the Middle East as well, such as Egypt and Jordan, and some of these other countries, certainly not Iran, thank God, uh, where they were being pulled in one direction, the leaders, and that was the direction that the Jews would pull them. Now they're being pulled in two opposite directions. They're being pulled by their people, who are not willing to support this genocide any further, and then they're being pulled by the Jews themselves. So the leaders find themselves in a very difficult position. Now, one of the hopeful things that has erupted lately, and please hear me out, I'm not singing the praises of this, I'm just giving a clinical analysis of it.
Sure.
One of the hopeful things that has come about recently is the close relationship that President Trump has with the Gulf states. Okay? In America, the Jews own the political process because of their money.
Yes.
Okay? They use that money in order to buy off our politicians and other people. Now you can see that the president recognizes that this money that the Jews use is a weapon that has to be matched with something else. And so I believe that he is developing these close relationships with countries like Qatar and the Saudis and others. As much as we, have our opinions about them, and the fact that they have sat back and watched as their Palestinian brothers and sisters have gone through hell. Nevertheless, the president recognizes here in a tactical way that he has to be able to match the money that the Jews pour into our political system if there's any chance of getting them out of our political system. And I really do believe that this is the reason why he is building these financial relationships with these Gulf states, because that money, the Jews cannot even begin to match the money that the Gulf states have. I mean, this is the reason, I think, for the gift of the airplane to the president. The president wanted to show the American people, look what we got from the Arabs. Look what we got from these people. What have the Jews ever given us? Okay.
Right.
So that is a hopeful sign. Okay. A hopeful sign. There's no question about the fact that despite President Trump's words about how much he loves Benjamin Netanyahu and how much he loves Israel, that he recognizes that Israel is dangerous and that something has to be done to put this wild animal in a cage before it destroys the entire planet. Okay? So there are hopeful signs. Okay? I'm not going to say that the Marines have landed. That's a statement that we use here in America to say that, everything's okay now. The Marines have landed and they're going to fight the bad guys and end this problem. But there are hopeful signs. At the same time, however, okay, I think that in the end, we all have a very difficult road ahead of us. The Jews are not going to sit back and watch as 3,000 years of planning just gets flushed down the toilet. Okay. They're going to do something. They're going to do something horrible. Okay. You're dealing with a group of people here whose religious prophecies tell them that they are someday going to incinerate the entire world. Okay. This is something, again, that people don't really understand about the kinds of energies that are driving all of this. Okay, when you have people like Benjamin Netanyahu quoting just a few days after October 7th, where he's quoting from Jewish scripture and saying, "You are commanded to go and exterminate Amalek down to the suckling child."
Right.
Okay, what he's saying in effect is that the Jews are going to go in and they're going to kill everything, everyone. So, as much as we have to remain hopeful because miracles do happen, okay, at the same time, I think we have to be realistic in our expectations and understand that we're dealing with diabolical forces here that far exceed the normal problems that human beings deal with on a political level. Okay, there's an element involved in this that is much bigger and much more dangerous than what we normally deal with. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore you're dealing with a group of people here who are diabolically deranged, and they're capable of doing anything.
Right. Right. Some argue that Zionism is so deeply embedded within the power structure of the West, in the United States, Britain, the media, and the lobbying efforts, that it will never face a real legitimacy crisis and will always be bailed out. What
Mm-hmm.
is your response to that claim?
Well, I think that is it's a very understandable statement. It's perfectly understandable why people such as you and I and others who have been watching the the power of Zionism and how it's Godzilla. It never gets defeated. Nothing ever shows up that defeats it. But consider what your country did in 1979. Okay?
Right.
Okay, right there is proof that Zionism is not Godzilla. It's not impossible to beat this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Not only what happened in 1979, but what has happened since then. The Islamic Republic of Iran is still there. It's still standing.
Right.
Okay, yes. And I mean, going through all of the trials, the sanctions, everything that has been brought to bear against your country, okay, you're still functioning. You have a functioning political system, you have a functional military. Um, the country, yes, it has its problems, but it's not being ripped apart into tiny pieces. It's not disintegrating. So, so in a sense, this is a miracle of sorts that happened to tell people, don't give up hope. Don't give up hope.
Yeah.
Just do your best, and eventually the tide will turn. So I understand why there are people who believe that Godzilla will never be defeated, but I don't believe that this is the case at all. I think that everything has a time where it's born and it lives and it dies, and it's replaced by something else. And I think, as I said at the beginning of the interview today, that we are in a new season now. Okay, the world is waking up, and and just as importantly, it's also very important to remember that given the diabolical nature of how the Zionist brain functions, it's very calculating, it's very clever, it's very cunning, but the closer that they get to their goal, the
Yeah.
more disconnected from reality they become as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to make mistakes, they make errors in judgment.
Right.
Now, what that means is that the clear picture that they started off seeing 100 years ago, we're going to move from A to B to C to D to E, F, G, blah, blah, blah. Going to move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Okay. The closer that they get to the end goal, the more clouded everything becomes, and they make mistakes.
Right.
So there is this built-in self-destructive virus within the Zionist program, that the closer that you know the story of Icarus, the
Yeah,
Greek,
sure.
okay,
Yeah,
so with the wax wings, and the closer that he flies to the sun, the wings begin to melt,
right.
and then he can't fly. It's the same thing with them. The closer that they get, the further that they get, because they can't. The power of God overcomes this diabolical power that drives them to behave the way that they do.
Sure.
And so we can't lose hope. We have to just do, as we said at the beginning here, we have to do what we can, leave the rest in the hands of the Creator. But eventually, this nightmare will come to an end. There's no question about it. Okay, God will have the last say in everything. And people such as you and I and all of the millions of others who have sacrificed our time and our energies, our peace of mind, doing what we have done, we will be rewarded by seeing the reign of Godzilla brought to an end.
Okay, if you would like to add something more, we are all ears.
Well, first of all, I apologize to the audience and to you. I know that people like short answers to things, short answers to short questions. So I appreciate your patience in that regard.
You're welcome.
And secondly, I think that, as I've said before, we cannot lose hope, because we have some very, very dark and dangerous and difficult days ahead of us. And that's why we have to hold on to that hope, because we cannot give up the momentum, the battlefield gains that we have right now. The world is waking up. They're finally waking up from this long, unnatural, and unholy sleep with regards to the danger that these people, that the Zionists pose to all of us. And so, even at the price of our lives, okay, we have to stay here fighting to the very end. When we run out of bullets, we use rocks. When we run out of rocks, we use sticks. When we run out of sticks, we use harsh words. Whatever we have to do to stay on the battlefield and to keep fighting. And I know that even if we don't live to see the victory will come by our efforts mixed with a miracle, right?
Right.
Just like the creation of a new life between a husband and a wife, okay? They do their part, and God does his part with the miracle by creating this human being. So the marriage of these two things, human activity plus the power of the Creator, and we will see this victory that it will be better than we can ever imagine.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your deep analysis, and thank you for taking your time. Take care. Bye bye.